Right now, beneath the concrete of one of Africa's most modern, bustling megacities, sits the dirt that holds the 1.6 million year old bones of the very first humans.
Yeah, it's a profound contrast.
It really is. And today, we are tracing a single patch of Earth. Our deep dive today is embarking on this really epic journey through time, and we're using an incredibly dense historical summary as our guide.
Right.
We're exploring the entire span of human existence, but through the lens of just one geographic location, which is Kenya.
Exactly.
We're starting with that ancient skeleton resting in the mud, and we're going to trace the events on that exact same piece of land all the way up to a modern republic of over 50 million people.
And, the overarching theme of the material we're analyzing today is this concept of layers.
Layers, right.
We're looking at history not just as a standard timeline, but as a series of profoundly deep geological and cultural layers just stacked right on top of one another.
Like a cake almost,
Right.
but over millions of years.
Exactly like that. You have the absolute earliest footprints in the Rift Valley at the very bottom. Then you stack on these massive waves of human migration.
Right.
On top of that, you layer the rise of sophisticated coastal empires, followed by the really grinding, brutal struggles of colonial rule, and finally, the highly complex realities of a modern democracy.
And for you listening, understanding this single stretch of land offers basically a blueprint for how human civilization actually functions.
It really does.
This is all about how we evolve as a species, how we inevitably clash over resources and ideologies, and how we rebuild societies out of the rubble, over and over again.
Yeah.
So to understand the top layer, we really have to dig all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
Take us back to August 1984, out to the shores of Lake Turkana.
So Lake Turkana is located in the far north of Kenya, sitting right within the Great Rift Valley. And a Kenyan fossil hunter named Kamoya Kimeu he's working in this incredibly harsh, arid landscape.
Right, it's basically a desert environment today.
Very unforgiving. He is scanning the ground, just looking at the mud and the sediment, and he spots a small piece of a skull that is literally eroding out of the earth.
See, I always try to wrap my head around the staggering improbability of a moment like that.
Oh, it's astronomical.
Because for a bone to fossilize, the conditions have to be absolutely perfect. The creature has to die, be buried almost immediately in the right kind of sediment, usually mud or volcanic ash, before scavengers can even get to it.
Right, the environment has to seal it in.
Yeah. Then it has to just sit there for 1.6 million years while tectonic plates shift, ice ages come and go, and weather patterns completely rewrite the surface of the Earth. And then at the exact right geological second, erosion exposes just enough of it so that a guy walking by who, happens to know exactly what a hominid bone looks like actually spots it.
Yeah. The mechanics of fossilization are just ruthless. The vast, overwhelming majority of living things that have ever existed leave absolutely zero trace behind.
It's dust.
Exactly. The Earth just reclaims them. So when Kimeu spots that fragment, he isn't just finding a bone, he's finding a statistical anomaly of astronomical proportions.
Wow.
And that single piece of skull leads his team to excavate an entire skeleton.
Which is incredibly rare.
Unbelievably rare. It belongs to a boy who died 1.6 million years ago, a specimen scientist later named Turkana Boy.
And the really crucial detail in our sources here is that this isn't just a handful of fragments. It is the most complete early human skeleton ever found.
Yes, and that completeness changes the entire paradigm of paleoanthropology.
Because before that, they were just working with, scraps?
Exactly. Before Turkana Boy, scientists were attempting to reconstruct our ancient history using scraps. A shattered femur, a piece of a jawbone, a few isolated teeth.
Right.
When you only have fragments, you are forced to make these massive leaps of logic to guess what the overall creature looked like and how it actually functioned.
You're kind of just filling in the blanks.
Yeah, right. But when you uncover an almost complete skeleton, you stop guessing and you start observing the actual mechanics of human evolution.
That makes sense.
You can see the precise angle of the pelvis, which proves exactly how they walked upright. You can look at the rib cage and the attachment points for muscles to really understand their stamina and how they breathed.
Oh, wow. So you get a full physiological picture.
You do. You can look at the cranial capacity to measure the size of the brain. Turkana Boy provides this unparalleled physical window into early human physiology, serving as absolute proof that this specific stretch of the Rift Valley is where the human story originates.
And it sets this incredible timescale for this deep dive. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone even conceived of a nation, before a single word was ever written down, before the concept of a border even existed, this land was home to our first footprints.
Yeah, early humans lived out their entire existence in small, highly mobile bands.
Just wandering.
Their entire worldview was dictated by immediate survival. They moved along the lakes and volcanoes of the Rift Valley, completely beholden to the environment. They followed the water, they followed the game, they gathered edible plants. They were entirely oblivious to concepts like, property ownership or states.
Which means that for over 1 million years, change in this region was practically non-existent.
Very stagnant.
You wake up, you find food, you find water, you try not to get eaten, and you survive to do it all again the next day. The pace of history is moving at a glacial speed.
Right.
But then the timeline we are following notes a massive sudden shift. About 10,000 years ago, the pace of human history just hits the accelerator.
Yeah, we enter a period defined by a radical shift in human technology, which the sources call the Great Convergence.
Oh.
Around 10,000 years ago, the practices of farming and animal herding began to spread into the region from the south.
So agriculture arrives.
Exactly. And this isn't just a new tool, it is a fundamental rewiring of how humans interact with the earth. Instead of constantly following the food, humans figure out how to make the food stay in one place.
That's a huge shift.
Massive. And this technological shift brings completely new groups of people migrating into the Kenyan landscape.
Right, and the sources outline 3 major linguistic and cultural groups converging on this area. First, you have Cushitic-speaking peoples arriving, bringing cattle with them to the highlands.
Yes.
Centuries later, Nilotic-speaking peoples follow, settling primarily around Lake Victoria and the Rift Valley.
Right, drawn to the water.
And then, by the first millennium, Bantu-speaking farmers migrate in from the west, fundamentally changing the landscape by actually clearing land and founding permanent villages.
Exactly.
Now, looking at this convergence, a massive question jumps out to me. You have these entirely different groups with different languages, different cultures, and entirely different survival strategies, like herding versus farming, all moving into the exact same general region.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Right. How did they not just immediately annihilate each other in a massive war over territory? Did the geography itself dictate a natural division of the land?
You hit the nail on the head. Geography wasn't just a factor. Geography was destiny here. The reason they didn't inevitably annihilate one another over a single patch of dirt is because their different survival strategies required completely different ecological niches.
Oh, so they weren't even looking for the same land.
Exactly. They weren't competing for the exact same resources. Let's break down the physical mechanics of these migrations. Take the Cushitic peoples, for example.
Cattle herders.
Right, they are cattle herders. Cattle require very specific conditions to survive. They need vast pastures, but more importantly, in East Africa, cattle need to be kept safe from insect-borne diseases that are rampant in the hotter, lower elevations.
Like what kind of diseases?
Specifically, diseases carried by the tsetse fly.
Okay, so if you bring your herd down into the lowlands, your entire livelihood essentially just gets wiped out by insects.
Precisely. Therefore, the highlands, with their cooler climate and much lower disease burden, become the absolute perfect geographical fit for the Cushitic herders. They occupy the high altitudes because that is where the physics of their economy function best.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then you have the Nilotic peoples. The material tells they are drawn to Lake Victoria and the Rift Valley.
Yeah, the Nilotic populations are historically and culturally deeply tied to water resources.
Right.
Their entire societal structure, their diets, their daily routines are built around proximity to large bodies of water.
Which Kenya has plenty of.
Absolutely. The massive expanse of Lake Victoria and the deep lakes of the Rift Valley provide the exact ecosystem their culture knows how to exploit and utilize. So they occupy the shorelines and the valleys.
And finally, the Bantu-speaking peoples arrive from the west, and they are farmers. So they're looking for something completely different.
Right. Farmers require arable land, steady rainfall, and fertile soil. But their arrival represents a much more profound disruption to the physical environment than the herders or the fishers. Well, a pastoralist moves through the landscape, right? Guiding animals over existing grass. A farmer fundamentally alters the landscape. The material specifically notes that the Bantu migrants are actively clearing land and founding villages.
Oh, they're changing the terrain itself.
Exactly. They are cutting down forests, they are burning away brush to return nutrients to the soil, And they're planting crops that require them to stay in one place for months or even years at a time.
Right, you can't just plant a field and walk away.
No, you're tied to it. They are putting down deep, permanent agricultural roots, establishing settlements that, in many cases, still stand today.
So for you listening, the mental image here really shouldn't be a melting pot where all these cultures blend into one homogeneous group. It's more of a mosaic.
A mosaic is a great way to put it.
You have these incredibly distinct lifestyles running totally parallel to one another. The high-altitude cattle herders are up in the hills, the lake-dwelling communities are down by the water, the permanent farming villages are carved out of the fertile plains. They're all sharing a broader geographic region, but they are tucked into their own specific environmental pockets.
And this era establishes a really deep, complex cultural diversity inland. It creates a vast network of inland societies that they trade with one another. Occasionally they clash at the borders of their ecological zones, but they largely maintain their distinct identities based on exactly how they extract calories from the earth.
But while this intricate mosaic is being built across the inland valleys and highlands, a completely different narrative is literally blowing in on the wind along the eastern edge of the land.
Yes.
The coast is about to experience a massive collision with the wider world.
Yeah, the inland narrative is really all about localized adaptation to the environment. The coastal narrative introduces an entirely new, massive variable, which is global maritime trade.
Right.
The source material explains that Arab and Persian traders begin utilizing the monsoon winds to sail across the Indian Ocean to reach East Africa.
And the mechanics of the monsoon winds are just fascinating. It's not just a standard storm system.
Yeah.
It operates like a massive natural conveyor belt across the ocean.
That's exactly how it functions.
Because of thermal dynamics and the way the land masses heat up and cool down, the winds blow steadily from the northeast, from Arabia and India toward Africa for half the year.
Right.
Then the system just flips, and the winds blow steadily from the southwest, from Africa, back toward Arabia and India for the other half of the year.
And that predictability is the absolute engine of ancient globalization.
Because you could actually plan a trip.
Exactly. Before steam power, crossing an ocean was incredibly dangerous and unpredictable. But the monsoon winds provided a reliable seasonal transit schedule. You know exactly when you could leave and exactly when you could return.
But there's a catch to this conveyor belt, right?
There's a big catch, because you have to wait for the winds to reverse. These Arab and Persian traders couldn't just sail to East Africa, drop off their goods, and sail home the next day.
They were essentially stranded. They had to wait months for the weather to change so they could catch the wind back.
Right. They had to establish semi-permanent settlements, they had to build storehouses, wait out the seasons, and interact deeply with the local population.
They lived there for half the year.
Essentially, yeah. And when these traders spend months at a time on the coast, they naturally meet the local Bantu communities who had migrated to the eastern edge of the continent. And the text note, something really profound happens here.
Look at that.
It says, these two distinct groups blend into something new.
And that blending gives birth to the Swahili civilization.
Yes. Swahili is a completely hybridized civilization. It isn't merely a trade partnership.
Go deeper than that.
Much deeper. The prolonged contact, intermarriage, and shared economic goals create a totally new cultural layer. You see it most clearly in the language itself.
Oh, right, the language.
Swahili is a Bantu language at its core, utilizing African grammar and syntax. But it incorporates a massive vocabulary of Arabic words, specifically words related to commerce, navigation, and law. It is a language literally engineered for global trade.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, if you were going to do business together for centuries, you absolutely need a shared vocabulary.
Exactly.
But it wasn't just language that blended, was it?
No, the Swahili civilization is fundamentally intertwined with the introduction of Islam.
Right.
The traders brought their religion, and it became a unifying cultural and legal framework along the entire coast. By the 12th century, this blending manifests in major physical infrastructure.
The stone towns.
The stone towns. The rise of stone towns along the shore is a physical declaration of permanence and extreme wealth.
They aren't just tents on the beach.
No, these aren't temporary trading posts made of wood and thatch. These are complex urban centers built from coral rag and stone, featuring multi-story houses, intricate mosques, and massive defensive walls. And among these stone towns, one city really emerges as a dominant, massive hub. and that's Mombasa.
Mombasa becomes the ultimate nexus point.
Yeah.
The material details that it turns into this massive hub for ivory, gold, and enslaved people moving between Africa, Arabia, and India.
Yeah, Mombasa's geography makes it the perfect deep water port, perfectly positioned to catch those trade winds. It becomes the linchpin connecting three massive regions of the globe.
A huge strategic choke point.
Exactly. The wealth flowing through its markets is just staggering. But we have to look impartially at the economic drivers of that wealth, as outlined in the historical record.
Right.
The trade was heavily built on the extraction of high-value natural resources from the African interior, specifically gold and ivory.
Very lucrative commodities.
But it was equally driven by the trafficking of human beings. Enslaved people were a core commodity in this Indian Ocean network, moved alongside the precious metals and animal tusks.
Right.
And this establishes a grim economic infrastructure that will violently expand in the eras to come.
Because that concentration of extreme wealth in Mombasa inevitably created a massive target on its back.
Absolutely.
In a globalizing world, you just can't hold a monopoly on Indian Ocean trade without a heavily armed competitor eventually trying to take it from you. When a city becomes that strategic and that rich, distant empires start looking at their maps.
The lure of that wealth sets the absolute stage for a violent collision. The material brings us to the year 1498, which marks the arrival of the Portuguese.
Vasco da Gama.
Vasco da Gama. His fleets navigate around the southern tip of Africa and sail up the eastern coast.
Right.
The text notes that their initial primary goal was simply seeking a maritime route to India to bypass the overland monopolies on the spice trade.
They were just passing through it first.
Essentially, yes. But when they arrive on the Swahili coast and see the sheer volume of wealth flowing through cities like Mombasa, the nature of their presence radically shifts from exploration to domination.
They want a piece of it.
They want the whole thing. Within a century, Portugal seizes control of Mombasa by sheer military force.
And to permanently lock down that control, in 1593, the Portuguese construct Fort Jesus.
Yeah.
This massive, heavily armed fortification kicks off what can only be described as a century of sieges. I mean, for nearly 100 years, the sources describe this grinding, brutal tug of war for this fort between Portuguese forces and Omani Arab fleets.
He was relentless.
But why pour so much blood and treasure into this one specific building for a century?
Because Fort Jesus represents a strategic absolute. Whoever holds Mombasa controls the trade. It is really that simple.
It's the key to the whole region.
In an era of naval dominance, a fortress heavily armed with artillery overlooking a deep-water harbor gives you complete control over who enters and who leaves.
Right.
Fort Jesus wasn't just a military garrison, it was a toll booth for global economic supremacy.
Yeah.
If your cannons controlled the harbor, you controlled the flow of the ivory, the gold, the enslaved people, and the immense wealth of the entire Indian Ocean network.
So for 100 years, it is just a devastating zero-sum war of attrition.
And the logistics of a 16th century siege are horrifying. You have fleets blockading the harbor to starve out the defenders inside the fort.
Oh, wow.
You have outbreaks of disease, scurvy, and just relentless artillery bombardment. The fort changes hands multiple times as defenders are starved into submission or overwhelmed by reinforcements arriving on the monsoon winds.
It's just wave after wave.
Exactly. This century of violence finally culminates in 1698. After a particularly grueling and devastating siege, Omani Arab forces finally drive the Portuguese out of Mombasa for good.
But the Portuguese exit doesn't exactly suddenly usher in an era of peace and freedom for the Swahili coast, does it?
Far from it. The Omani victory simply replaces one foreign empire with another foreign empire.
Right.
The coast is brought under the direct control of the Sultanate of Zanzibar. And the material explicitly notes that under this Omani rule, the slave trade does not diminish.
It gets worse.
It grows exponentially into one of the region's darkest and most prominent industries. The infrastructure of human trafficking expands to meet global demands, causing immense suffering across the coastal hinterlands.
So you have this swelling dark industry operating on the coast. You have massive wealth, intense violence, massive fortresses and empires clashing for a century.
Yeah.
But then the source material delivers a completely jarring contrast. It explicitly states that while all this is happening, the inland peoples continue trading, farming, and building kingdoms largely undisturbed by the coast.
That's right.
Wait, how's that physically possible? You have a century of brutal sieges, cannon fire, and a massive slave trade operating on the eastern edge of the land, And the inland groups just didn't notice.
Yeah.
How isolated were they?
It sounds totally impossible until you look at the physical geography that separates the Swahili coast from the deep interior highlands in the Rift Valley. Between the coastal strip and the fertile inland areas lies a massive expanse of incredibly harsh, arid scrubland, historically referred to by the coastal traders as the Nika, or wilderness.
The wilderness.
Yeah. And this terrain is punishing. It lacks reliable water sources and is heavily infested with tsetse flies.
Ah, the flies again.
Right, making it practically impossible to cross with pack animals.
So the geography essentially acts as a massive fortress wall.
It acts as an incredible buffer zone. The Arab and Swahili traders generally didn't march deep into the interior themselves during this era. They relied on intermediaries from groups living on the edges of the Nika to bring goods to the coast.
Oh, so they traded at the border, basically.
Exactly. So the brutal mechanized violence of the Portuguese and Omani fleets was strictly contained to the seaboard. The descendants of the Cushitic, Nilotic, and Bantu migrations, the people who built that intricate inland mosaic we discussed earlier, were continuing their parallel lives.
Completely separate.
Expanding their agricultural systems, building complex societies, just completely insulated from the bloodshed of Fort Jesus. They were operating in a completely different economic and political sphere.
It is genuinely like two different worlds existing on the exact same landmass, just separated by a desert.
Yeah.
But this insulation, this separation of the inland peoples, is about to be shattered forever. And the mechanism that shatters it doesn't originate in Mombasa or the Rift Valley. It actually starts in a conference room in Europe.
Right. We are moving into the late 19th century now. The historical summary brings us to the Berlin Conference.
The scramble for Africa. This is where European powers literally sit down around a massive table in Germany and carve up a map of an entire continent.
Yes.
And Great Britain officially claims Kenya as its territory.
The Berlin Conference represents the ultimate terrifying abstraction of colonial power. You have diplomats and politicians in Europe drawing arbitrary lines on a map, claiming absolute ownership over lands, resources, and millions of people they have never seen and know absolutely nothing about.
Right, they're just looking at paper.
Exactly. They draw a line, color it British imperial pink, and declare it a protectorate. But an abstract line on a map means nothing unless you can project physical power on the ground.
And projecting power into the Kenyan interior was nearly impossible because of that harsh geographic buffer zone we literally just talked about.
Right, the Nyika.
The British realize they claim this massive territory, but they can't actually get to it.
Exactly. To turn an abstract claim into a profitable, manageable colony, the British needed infrastructure. They needed a way to bypass the harsh terrain and connect the deep interior to the global markets on the coast.
They needed a shortcut.
And the mechanism they choose for that reality is a train. In 1895, Britain begins the monumental task of building a railway, starting from the coastal hub of Mombasa and driving it all the way inland to Lake Victoria.
The construction of this railway is a massive undertaking. It cuts right through the difficult terrain, right up into the highlands, basically slicing through the very center of the inland mosaic.
And we must look very carefully at the harsh economic mechanics that follow the construction of this railway.
Because it wasn't cheap.
Not at all. Building a railway line thousands of miles through harsh African terrain is incredibly, overwhelmingly expensive. The British colonial administration goes deep into debt to build it.
Right.
Once the tracks are laid, the railway absolutely has to pay for itself. It has to generate massive amounts of freight to ship back to the coast to cover the debt.
But the indigenous populations living in the highlands aren't exactly producing the kind of industrial cash crops the British need to export to pay off a railway.
Right, they're not operating on that scale.
They are practicing subsistence farming and cattle herding.
Which leads to a brutal, calculated shift in colonial policy. The British administration decides that the only way to make the railway profitable is to establish massive industrial-scale agricultural plantations in the interior.
Okay.
To grow high-value cash crops like tea and coffee, they need the most fertile land with the best climate.
The highlands.
Yeah.
The exact land where the Cushitic, Nilotic, and Bantu descendants have been living for centuries.
The text is extremely explicit about the cause and effect here. The British actively solicit white settlers from Europe and South Africa to move to the colony, promising them prime agricultural land.
Right.
To make room for these settlers, the colonial government systematically and forcibly displaces the indigenous populations. The sources specifically note the displacement of the Kikuyu, the Maasai, and other communities by force.
This is the dark irony of the railway. We usually think of a train as a symbol of connection, progress, bringing people together.
Yeah.
But here, the railway is explicitly engineered as a tool of extraction and displacement.
Yeah.
It facilitates the removal of the very people who had adapted to and cultivated that geography since the Great Convergence.
The indigenous populations are pushed into restricted, much less fertile native reserves. Their traditional grazing routes are severed by fences and train tracks.
It's cut in half.
Exactly. The intricate mosaic of inland life is completely fractured to serve the economic needs of the colonial administration. We're analyzing this strictly based on the mechanics of colonial land policy, as presented in the text. The cause was the financial necessity to make the railway profitable via settler agriculture.
Right.
And the effect was the violent systemic displacement of the native population. And the long-term inescapable result of that policy, the material state simply resentment builds for decades.
I mean, you can only push people off their ancestral land, tax them, and force them to work for poverty wages on farms they used to own for so long before that pressure finds a violent release valve.
It's inevitable.
The abstraction of the Berlin Conference created a very real, incredibly dangerous pressure cooker on the ground. By the 1950s, the historical record shows us, the cooker explodes.
The resentment crystallizes into organized armed resistance. In 1952, a secret, highly militant movement known as the Mau Mau begins a guerrilla war against the British colonial rule and the white settlers.
The Mau Mau rely on asymmetrical warfare.
Right.
They don't have a conventional army, obviously. So they operate out of the dense forests of the highlands, launching devastating hit-and-run attacks and sabotage campaigns.
Yeah.
The British respond with overwhelming force, officially declaring a state of emergency.
The colonial military apparatus launches a massive counterinsurgency campaign. They round up tens of thousands of suspected Mau Mau sympathizers into detention camps, and they actively hunt the military leaders of the rebellion deep in the forests.
This massive military hunt leads to a critical moment in October 1956. Colonial forces managed to capture and execute Dedan Kimathi, who the sources describe as the Mau Mau's most wanted commander.
Yes.
Now, from a purely tactical standpoint,
Yeah.
if you are the colonial administration, you probably assume that executing the top general will break the back of the rebellion. You think you are cutting the head off the
Right, that's the logic.
But it's actually the martyr effect.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. The colonial authorities fundamentally miscalculated the depth of the resentment. The text explicitly points out that Kimathi's death does not end the demand for freedom. It actively ardens it.
By executing Kimathi, the British didn't solve their problem. They effectively built a monument.
Exactly.
They took a mortal man who could be fought in a forest and turned him into an invincible symbol of resistance that could inspire an entire population.
The execution acts as a huge catalyst. The hardening of the independence movement, combined with the staggering financial cost of maintaining the military occupation, and of course mounting international pressure in a post-World War II world, it eventually forces the British Empire to concede.
They just couldn't hold on anymore.
The colonial project becomes totally unsustainable, and this leads us to a monumental date in the timeline, which is December 12, 1963. Kenya officially gains its independence, and Jomo Kenyatta takes office as its first prime minister.
Okay, so they have their flag, they have their prime minister. The British lower the Union Jack and sail home. But the sources make it incredibly clear that independence is not a magic wand.
Not at all.
Kenyatta and the new government are inheriting a staggeringly complex and dangerous situation.
The baggage inherited by this newly independent nation is just overwhelming. We really need to dissect the three specific systemic challenges outlined in the material.
Let's do it.
First, they inherit foreign-built British institutions. The entire framework of the state, the legal system, the parliamentary structure, the civil service, was not organically developed by the people who now have to use it.
It was forced on them.
Right. It was imposed from the outside, originally designed to control the population, not empower them.
Second, and perhaps most volatile, they inherit decades of unresolved land disputes. The British may have left, but the resentment from the forced displacements during the railway era didn't just vanish at the stroke of midnight on Independence Day.
The land remained an open, festering wound. The process of buying back land from departing white settlers and redistributing it to the millions of displaced indigenous people was fraught with corruption, political favoritism, and massive logistical hurdles.
It is messy.
Very messy. The fundamental grievance that started the Mau Mau War was not neatly resolved by the new flag. But the third challenge the text identifies is the most profound structural issue of all.
Okay, what is it?
The new nation inherits a population united more by geography than by shared history.
Let's really dig into this phrase, because this is the absolute core of the modern challenge. So they basically drew a box around totally different cultures, called it a country, and left. How long before that artificial border started causing actual physical conflict?
It creates immediate, intense structural tension. Think all the way back to the Great Convergence we talked about earlier.
To herders and farmers.
The Cushitic herders, the Nilotic fishing communities, the Bantu farmers. Then add the Swahili Islamic civilization on the coast. For centuries, these were highly distinct societies with entirely different languages, economic systems, and historical trajectories.
Totally different worlds.
And the only reason they are now suddenly grouped together is because diplomats at the Berlin Conference drew a line around them and labeled the box Kenya.
So on December 13, 1963, you suddenly have millions of people who are officially citizens of the exact same nation.
Yes.
They have to share one central government, one national budget, and one military. But their primary unifying factor is simply that they happen to live within the arbitrary lines drawn by a European power a few decades earlier.
How do you take a mosaic and force it into a single, unified picture? When resources are scarce and the central government controls the distribution of those resources, political competition inevitably fractures along the deepest existing fault lines.
Which are ethnic lines.
Exactly. In this case, ethnic and historical identities. The material suggests that governing a country built on such a complex, fractured foundation requires a very specific, often heavy-handed approach just to maintain stability.
And we transition now into the survival and evolution of the modern republic. The timeline tells us Kenyatta rules until his death in 1978. After him, Daniel Arap Moi assumes power, and he manages to hold on to it for 24 years.
24 years is an immense span of time for a newly formed state. Moi's tenure is primarily defined by the sheer mechanics of survival and the centralization of power.
Right.
Governing that fractured mosaic required tight political control. The sources note a pivotal moment. Moi survives a military coup attempt in 1982.
The fact that parts of the military tried to violently overthrow the government just 2 decades into independence highlights exactly how fragile the entire national project was.
The coup attempt deeply reinforces a single-party state mentality. Moi steers Kenya through the incredibly volatile geopolitical era of the Cold War by maintaining a tight grip on the political apparatus, basically using state resources to balance competing ethnic interests through patronage.
Okay.
However, by the 1990s, internal pressure and demands from international donors force a massive shift. Kenya transitions from single-party rule into a multi-party democratic era.
But simply allowing multiple political parties to run in an election doesn't suddenly erase the underlying historical fractures we've been talking about. If anything, it weaponizes them.
The transition to multi-party democracy absolutely exposes the structural weaknesses of the state. The text states bluntly that Kenya's democracy remains fragile.
Right.
In a system where voting largely aligns with ethnic identity rather than ideological policy, elections become incredibly high-stakes, zero-sum contests. If your group wins the presidency, your region gets the roads, the schools, and the government jobs. If your group loses, you get nothing.
And that fragility, that zero-sum political architecture, is put to the ultimate horrifying test in late 2007. The sources tell us that a highly disputed presidential election triggers weeks of intense ethnic violence across the country, resulting in over 1,000 people dead.
It was devastating.
We go from single-party survival to a multi-party era straight into horrific violence in just a few decades.
The tragedy of 2007 is the violent manifestation of every unresolved historical layer we have discussed today. The violence wasn't just a spontaneous reaction to a ballot count. It was the pressure cooker whistling again.
The history boiling over.
Yes. The disputed election was simply the spark that ignited decades of unresolved land disputes dating back to the colonial railway, combined with the inherent tension of diverse groups forced to compete for central resources within an artificial border. It was the legacy of the Berlin Conference violently colliding with modern democratic mechanics.
But the narrative doesn't end in the ashes of 2007.
No, it doesn't. And this is where the extraordinary resilience of the Kenyan people is truly demonstrated. Recognizing that their current political structure was leading them towards self-destruction, the country takes radical action.
What do?
In 2010, they adopt a completely new constitution. The text is specific about its intent. It was deliberately designed to prevent a recurrence of the 2007 violence.
They didn't just write new rules, they fundamentally re-engineered the mechanics of the state to manage the mosaic.
Exactly. They implemented structural changes, most notably the devolution of power. By creating county governments and distributing national funds directly to local levels, they reduced the absolute zero-sum power of the central presidency.
Oh, so it lowers the stakes of the national election?
Precisely. Even if your preferred candidate doesn't win the national election, your local region still possesses the authority and the budget to govern itself.
That's smart.
The 2010 Constitution is a mechanism of national survival. It is the people of Kenya actively attempting to forge that shared history they were missing at independence, doing so through the painful, deliberate process of confronting their historical fractures and attempting to heal them legally and structurally.
Which brings us to today. The sources describe Kenya today as a modern republic of over 50 million people.
50 million.
50 million citizens, dealing with the complexities of the 21st century, living, working, and building on the exact same patch of earth where this entire story began. And to truly appreciate the magnitude of where Kenya is today, we have to zoom all the way back out.
We've traced an almost unfathomable timeline today. We started at the very bottom layer, with small bands of early humans walking the Rift Valley, completely unaware of the future.
All right.
We watched the great convergence of farmers and herders adapting to the geography. We saw the monsoon winds act as a conveyor belt to build the incredibly wealthy Swahili coast.
Stone Town.
Yes. We watched European and Omani fleets lay devastating siege to Fort Jesus. We witnessed the brutal, abstract geometry of British colonization and the railway, the fierce, asymmetrical resistance of the Mau Mau, and the painful, resilient forging of a modern, 50 million-strong democracy out of an artificial border.
It is the ultimate story of layers, a blueprint of how humanity struggles, adapts, and survives. But there is one final lingering image from our deep dive today that we want to leave you with, because it brings this entire massive timeline full circle.
The material notes a really poignant reality about the present day. That skeleton of Turkana Boy, the 1.6 million-year-old fossil pulled from the mud that proved our origins in the Rift Valley, is currently kept in a museum in Nairobi.
Nairobi, a massive, modern, bustling megacity. Traffic, skyscrapers, fiber optic cables, the capital of this massive republic.
And Turkana Boy rests there, in a temperature-controlled room just a few feet away from the very dirt where humanity itself may have started walking.
That is the thought we want to leave you with to mull over. When you walk the streets of a modern city, whether it's Nairobi or wherever you happen to be listening to this deep dive right now, you are walking on top of millions of years of human triumph, brutal conflict, and stubborn survival.
The layers.
The layers. The mud that held Turkana Boy safe for 1.6 million years, preserving our earliest history, is the exact same foundation upon which the entire